what you're going to tell me.
I think wrong is not the right adjective to use. I think it's the first attempt, because at the same time we're learning this. This is brand new. This has never been introduced in the GVDS before. You have to understand the expectations I have are really minimal. What I'm attempting to do is to apply my understanding of the approach based on conversations I've had about it, the initial experiments we've done in the beginning of the year to kind of apply it. I know that there are people that have made a living on the enterprise level and kind of showing companies how to do this. So again, I would much rather have people try it for the first time and have a new experience like I do, and then question what's effective, what isn't. We've already had conversations around where it makes sense to kind of put this in terms of like its implementation and what's more valuable for teams to do so. So I'll preface that by saying, look, I really don't have any expectations. I'm totally fine with the idea that we're trying this out for the first time to see where it goes, and that's the important thing.
Cool. Thanks for clarifying. You have very low expectations. Mark, what do you have to say about this?
Mark may have a different view in saying low expectations. What are you talking about? I'm not wasting my time. I want to wait.
Well, I'm not a good student because I was not there during your session because I had another meeting, and the other session from another team was at very early in the morning. So I don't actually really how it works. So I just followed on the mural, tried to figure out how this thing works. And for what I understood is that I love the beacon concept of Lisa, so I actually wanted to pick up on that. But I'm a more lean startup person, so I would actually use for an MVP with a promotional video, just like Dropbox did it before, a promotional video of how the beacon can actually save and help victims. And a promotional video actually for the government, like Ministry of Health, NGOs, organizations that are related to domestic violence, and have a call to action to see if these organizations, victims are actually reacting on that promotional video. So the experiment would be, if I see well, to create a landing page with a promotional video with a call to action, and also to create a promotional video, other animation, Powtoon, or doodle kind of thing. So that's what I understood from the entire exercise. I do have my question about where to put this, because it actually gives me the feeling to start from the what instead of from the why. So that means that, okay, I have this idea solution in my mind, but it might as well not be the right solution because we didn't go through the why. So, and that's actually my take of, okay, is this really before as a pre-study or pre-research, or before the SME interviews actually, or the alignment with the team, actually the right position to do this?
Do you think that and this is a follow-up to that question, Mark, or that statement, do you think the nature of the prototype that you would do before you go into a sprint, it could potentially not necessarily be about validating an idea, but validating your understanding of the problem? Where a lot of the subject matter expert interviews, like the one we just did moments ago with Micah Strudolf with blended learning, where we had a combination of Q&A and then people asking our questions directly. For a lot of the subject matter expertise, we struggle sometimes with finding the right people to talk to inform us about the problem space. Could prototyping be oriented towards an outcome where your hypothesis is that if you're going to talk to particular people in a particular industry, you're going to end up with this kind of outcome? I'm riffing here. I don't wonder if the nature of the engagement is different than it would be like during the sprint, where you're actually testing out the solution sketches and things like that. And by the way, I saw your comment, Lisa, about an ex-Googler saying that they use prototyping instead of prototyping in sprints. So that's what prompted me to kind of bridge that question with yours, Mark.
Okay. Just because, yeah, I know I'm not a victim myself of domestic violence, but I know someone, and that's my sister, like more than 20 years ago. And the question is, if you prototype or you make a prototype of your assumption, it might not fit the right answer because a lot of those victims don't have the courage or the strength to reach out to other people. I mean, she was my sister. I never knew it. She never talked to me. Mm-hmm. So even if family members don't have the courage to tell her because they're too much ashamed, then there's another problem. So I can have a tool that can, a great beacon, but if we can't reach it somehow for them to use it, it is like a great tool that never one uses it. So that's why I'm actually wondering if it's in the right timing and actually assume, yeah, confirming your assumption or validating your assumption is not validating the why.
Yeah. And Joshua Fraser posed a question that's kind of in the same thing. He asks, what's the rationale of doing this before the sprint as opposed to doing this during the sprint? The original author had a video, Alberto Savoia had a video on his YouTube site where he basically addressed this, where his rationale or his approach or his thought, his point of view was, if you do this, you'll figure out whether or not you should be doing a sprint at all. If the market doesn't tell you that what you're attempting to do with your idea has any merit, you can save yourself a lot of time. If your 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 micro experiments don't yield the outcome or the result or the direction or it doesn't validate your assumption around where you're going to go with things. So it's kind of like a time and effort expense savings if you can validate or invalidate the direction you may be going in. Part of why I kind of pressed, or I wouldn't say pressed, but I strongly suggested prototyping for some teams to try it out, is that it may validate or invalidate the assumptions that people have around where they could go with things even before they go into their sprint week. I know designers that have talked to me in private where it's like, I already have ideas. I like to kind of publicly kind of put them out there to see what people think. It's kind of the same thing with this. It's like, you're really just saying, okay, we've got a lot of different directions we can go in. We have assumptions about the audience as well as what they're thinking about. This kind of cuts to the chase and really gets to like evidence or rationale that would feed into the design sprint process for the following week. Period. Because nobody said anything after that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something, if I may. In our case, since it's a very difficult topic, and that's just my personal opinion after going through the pre-sprint week and going through the process in Hill, I felt like we didn't know enough about the victims and how they really felt. And I would like to have interviewed some of them first before actually going into prototyping in this case. So I would have maybe done the SME interviews and then problem framing and prototyping, or the SME interviews at least before prototyping in this specific case. But it always depends on what you're working on.
Primarily for the sensitivity and the nature of the subject matter, correct?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Mark, you gonna say something?
Yeah, is it the goal to vote on one of these experiments afterwards? Or does anyone does this experiment by themselves? And if so, where is then the collaboration with the entire team, like the 100 collaboration?
So maybe it's good for the purposes of people that are not part of the context of this to basically explain from beginning to end how we've kind of done this in the GVDS around kind of the process that we've taken in this template and where we've arrived, what Sandy's seeing here. I mean, how does everyone feel about that? Does that work?
Yeah.
Okay. Sandy, do you want to drive and I'll just narrate where you go all the way to the left of the mural and we can start from there. It's like roll and keep on pushing, go on there. There you go. Keep, because it's long and horizontal. So,
yes.
Okay. So zoom out just a little bit, if you could, please.
Zoom out?
Zoom out.
Okay. That's out. That's all the way out.
Okay, there it goes, a little bit on delay. Okay, so for the that's that's a little bit delayed. That's my fault. Okay, so for those who are still curious about what we're talking about when we say prototyping, uh, look up Alberto Savoia, his book called The Right It. You also can do a Google search for him. He's got a website, he's got media, his YouTube channel is about it. But essentially, it's a process for figuring out the desirability in for your idea in a particular market or for a particular audience. The book came out last year. He did a Stanford presentation on it that summarizes it fairly well. There's Q&A on the YouTube site that I've been referencing for things like, when do you actually do this process in terms of like design sprints, lean startup, and so on. So he has kind of fielded all those questions. What I wanted to do with this was to introduce it to the GVDS as a way of doing an alternative to the traditional SME interviews, problem framing, or in addition to those things. So what you're seeing here is something where it's a play off of Sandy Lam's kind of template. And I have to give her credit because most of everything that we do in the GVDS graphically is something that she's created or has a hand up. So I know she isn't her own biggest fan, but I'm the one like Lisa, where you're kind of doing this. Yes, we are doing the rolling fist kind of thing, or it just keeps on going. That's Sandy. So by the way, follow hashtag #TheSandyLam if you want updates on anything she's doing. Okay, so what you're seeing here is a visualization generally of the prototyping process at a very high level view. And this is meant to, in my attempt to explain what it is. And there's a companion video that I made for it that I'm going to update that walks teams through this process. And week 2 and 3 teams are going to need this. So the first part is just basically taking your idea and starting to frame it in terms of a hypothesis. The core idea being, if this idea exists, or this particular idea I have happened for this particular audience related to the challenge, then they would probably do this set of actions. And it's meant to be kind of vague. It's like, if I had something like this for the people that I know they're in this, then they would probably kind of get around to this. And it's meant to be kind of lumpy all over the place. And what you do is that based on that statement or that feeling or that thought you have, what's the one assumption that you have that would probably take its legs out, where it's like you're assuming something about the audience or the idea that you're really trying to test this hypothesis, and you make that part of your conversation. Once you get done with those 2 sections, you go into the idea title and you give it like just whatever it is. And in this template that we provide in GVDS, we have a kind of an example up at the top to kind of help things along. On the part 2, where you formulate an XYZ hypothesis, I think it was Sandy or someone else was gracious enough to kind of put the challenge to the left, so it was a frame of reference. And you start going into breaking it down a bit. So this is going to be your first attempt at measuring what people will do when they encounter your idea. So it can be 1 or 2 people, it can be 30%, it can be like a group, but it's kind of getting specific around how many and how much, what kind of metric you're going to be measuring or paying attention to, that would lead you down the path of thinking that there's either adoption or some sort of attention being paid to what you're doing. So the first one is access the dimension. Why is the target market? Who is the audience for what you're thinking about? And it's basically a reflection of what you had started with in part 1. You're just basically reframing it here in your best interpretation of it. And Z is what they're going to be doing, and then the outcome that you expect them to do based on whatever idea you put in front of them. Now, everyone has puts down what they think works, and then they explain it, or not. I guess at this point they didn't explain it, but they put it all down there. And then you work into part 3, which is one of the key components of prototyping, which is hypozooming. And what hypozooming is meant to do is to take your initial thought about your target market and think about how close or how far they are to your reach, like how the distance to data, how close can you get to particular folks. And what this is meant to do is to say, okay, you put your initial target audience in the center and go, what is smaller and what is larger than that? So some people look at this from a geographical standpoint, like, oh, the world, state, city, town, like somebody I know, or it could be a framework where they look at the target audience in terms of their evolution with the idea. Everyone has a different play on it. The key with this is to think of the target audience in terms of, if you were to do an experiment, how how close, how reachable are they to basically get some feedback from them, some idea of what they would do if they encountered it, what would be their action. And that's kind of where you have to be with target audience. The action they take is going to be something where the initial action will be something where they're either giving you some money, they're giving you their personal email address, they're volunteering their time, something that you think would be in conjunction or in comparable with the target audience that you're thinking about. And then we do the same thing here. We look at it from this perspective of the action you want them to take, but what would be a home run? What would be like something where it would be amazing if something happened in relation to the challenge that you had? And then same thing with the idea, the same thing with minimal. What's the minimal amount of evidence or skin in the game you need from your audience to say they are actually interested in your idea? They're proving through their actions that they want to basically engage it. So we have people do the spectrum on this, and then it's a learning moment where you go, okay, like say some people were saying the world when it came to the audience. That's fantastic if you want to reach everyone, but it's not really realistic, especially if you want to get someone's feedback on something. So we dial it down and try to get it to like an individual or maybe even a group or somebody that they have direct access to. Obviously, in the age of COVID, we can't physically go to people because we're restricted by digital, but that kind of reframes it in terms of who you engage. Same thing with actions. You know, are you looking for like a sign up, or are you looking for like a social share, but something that equates to that skin in the game where people are showing commitment and not just telling you what they say. The famous quote that I always say from the book is like, it's much easier for people to open their mouth than it is to open their wallet. And what you want to do is the latter, where it's like they're giving you some sort of commerce or transaction in some form, social or otherwise, in relation to the idea that you have. Once you hypozoom and you reframe both Y and Z, you put that back into your XYZ hypothesis in part 2 and say, does this read better for you? Does this work? And if the XYZ hypothesis starts to sound doable, you go into the next part, which is part 4, which is all about where Mark and I and everyone else left off around looking at setting up a particular type of prototype that will get you the outcome that you had stated in the XYZ hypothesis. And in the book and on the website, they have different versions of this. They have the fake door, which is basically something that looks real, but when you go through it, you realize that it's just basically a setup, but it's meant to try to see if you are going to commit to something in particular. And I have to give a shout out to Ian Thorne. He basically created all of these particular graphical examples of what they are from the book. He actually has a whole mural that has the entire spectrum of things. And before I'm done, I'll link to it in chat so that people can check that out as well. But what I had people do, or asked people to do, was to look at all these different types, put their name in a dot up above, and drag it down to the bottom of that particular prototype as a way of kind of anchoring themselves to say, okay, I'm going to do a one-night stand, I'm going to do MVP, or I'll do YouTube, or a combination of both. And then if we scroll further down, Sandy, from this particular view, this is where you're going to concentrate on the execution of the actual prototype. Whereas you're going to do this experiment using this type of prototype, and the action they're going to take is hopefully the same you put in your XYZ hypothesis, but maybe it's a slight variation based on the prototype itself. So in this instance, for the example, I'm going to use a short video explaining how a mood light works for me, for my particular one. And I'm going to ask for a down payment for a future model that's connected to a type form. So I'm going to see if people will actually give me some money for this particular thing so that I can start building it. It's kind of like the Tesla thing where I'm asking people for a down payment in advance to start building something that would reflect and gauge mood in a room. So that was my version of it. Then for Sandy's, hers was about creating a social media post about launching a Kickstarter and asking for people to reshare as her metric to see if people would do that. The argument could be, is that actually skin in the game? Maybe. It depends on what your metric is in terms of your engagement and validating your idea. But if you really want to do, if the market is going to pay for the training app, then it's a different prototype altogether. But again, it really is the comfortability of the person doing the prototype from the event perspective and what they are attempting to learn with this. So I didn't have any expectation on the prototype side of what people were going to create. My hope for this particular episode was that we were going to take one of these and actually start creating it live so you can see what the time ask or the time spent is to do this. Because a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to need to take 3 or 5 days to create something that's really going to be compelling, when really you don't need to do that. You just need to start the conversation about what you're trying to do and see how people react to it, so you get real data, fresh data, your own data, Yoda, as they could say in the book, around what the market is saying about your approach. That way, once you get those results, you go back to your XYZ hypothesis, you go back to your original idea, and you can change anything of that if you think it's going to modify and get you closer to a reaction or to an outcome that you're thinking about. So this was meant to be in either the pre-sprint section to start getting more and more market feedback to inform your efforts during sprint week, and to Lisa's note about people using prototyping instead of prototyping, that after you do your solution sketch, you actually go to the market with that and see if it actually works. Then you modify in real time what that looks like and how people react to it. So I think I explained it fairly well. Is there anything I may have missed for people that are on here, Lisa, Mark, or Sandy? Anything that I may not have explained properly?
No, I think I'm just very curious how you can create a prototype in 29 minutes because you talk a lot.
Yeah, that's also what I'm waiting for. So the great explanation, Robert, but show us. Don't tell us.
So, all right. So I am going to do that.
Challenge accepted.
Hey, I want to slide in the 90% of market failure. But, you know, if I had some help with people that I knew that could help me with this in 29 minutes, then maybe it could work. So let's see how it fleshes out. So we have the ones that you have on the screen, Sandy. There's 3 different ones. There's create a social media post about launching a Kickstarter and developing this training app and ask to reshare the post. Create a video showing how you would send a signal on Beacon and what would happen, and show how they would be rescued and supported. Okay, so here's what I think I'll do. I want to do Sandy's because I know I can execute on that in social media fairly well. But I think I should give examples on what I would do for Lisa's and for others as like a first step, if that would help, if I kind of do it like that. Okay. So for Lisa's, create a video showing how you would send a signal on Beacon and what would happen next, show how they would be rescued and supported. Now, for me, I'm fairly good at Figma, where I'm dangerous enough to know what I can do, but I can literally in a Loom video create something where I'm doing a step-by-step where it's basically going to be, I'm going to use the power of signals, meaning that I'm going to use visuals and like a one-liner. And I would go, okay, I'd like to introduce you to a concept called Beacon. And this is the stepped process. You do a visual and a line, a visual and a line, a visual and a line. You just move the cursor over to the right and you use Loom to either center yourself right below your idea, and you record that in Loom. Once you do that, at the end, you go, if you could, I'd like to start a conversation about the creation of this. I would like you to send me your personal email address. And if you could, and if you're really, really interested, there's a donation link down below. And basically it would be a matter of probably going to using PayPal, because I have that then already set up, where I just like in the PayPal quick link, I'll put like what it is and a description of what the latest is like. If you'd like to be part of the build of this particular idea, then go ahead and do so. I don't know Kickstarter because I only have done once before, and I know they've updated their engagement model. And there's a bit of and it says this in the book, you can use those third-party tools, but if they're actually donating directly to you, then there's more of a connection with you and your idea. So that's why I tend to go for PayPal and do it that way. Now, since you're not trying to, I would assume you're not going after an audience that's the victim of domestic violence, or you're not doing that. You're really talking about the idea and the concept, but not really trying to cater to that audience directly. I think it's a better strategic approach that you kind of go, okay, for people that want to kind of explore this issue seriously, you make it part of the journey. That's would be the messaging I would put in the actual video. At the end, for the email sign up, I would actually put in, and this would depend on what you are, but for me, I would do the survey in type form. I would kind of make it really, really fast. The link would be to PayPal. I would encourage people to keep their receipts, because if I refund the money, which I will, I'll say like if refunds are requested, then go for it. I would kind of do that as the last action item. I think the overall would take me a day to do it, and I would give it about 2 days to run. So to recap, I would use Figma. I would use Loom Pro. I would first do like an image, like Beacon, like a first thing of what it is. image, headline, or like little description at the bottom, move from left to right as you would like a slide, but you're doing it manually. Don't worry about music overs or anything like that, but they're going to listen to the sound of your voice. And at the end is like, if you want to continue this journey with me, there's two options. You can do your real email sign up here for updates, which I'll do. Like I'll give an update at the end of the month. You can give an expectation. And then if you'd like to start the conversation on the side of actually building it and being part of the team that builds it, there's a PayPal link to basically do funding. I'm looking for this amount to kind of get started. So you can give it a frame. So you're not just, it's a big bucket, you just throw your money in and it just happens. You're really just saying, okay, this is why I probably need to get started. So if this is going to be real, let's make it real. And they can probably hear in your voice whether the motivation you have, or like the interest you have in the topic. So that's, I would actually use your cult of personality to kind of frame this in a way so that they're not buying necessarily into the idea, but they're also buying into you and what you can do and what you can bring forward with it. So if it's combined, I think it could be, you could have some pretty good results. So that would be the way I'd go about this one. One day, create the video, do it in Figma, set up the type form or the survey or anything you want to do, but make sure I use PayPal, so you can use whatever you'd like, but there's those two engagement models. And then depending on where you think it's the right audience, share it on Instagram or Facebook or somewhere else and just see what kind of comes out of that. Does that sound good?
Sounds very good and very clear. Thank you.
Okay. Give me the next one. Where's Andrew?
I think
Mark,
Mark
go ahead, Mark.
Yeah. Does this replace the 1 day prototyping, storyboarding, and so on? Because it sounds really similar.
Yep. In fact, what you could do is that it doesn't necessarily be individual. You could have 2 or 3 or 4 team members working on this, and you could do a rumble, so that the rumble is really market validation of whatever your idea is. So that if you team up with a couple of people on the team that want to go in a certain creative direction, and then say Lisa and Sandy go, you know what, let's combine forces and see what we can do in 24 hours, then it's a really quick turnaround. But then the team learns in 2 or 3 different avenues what seems to work in the market with the parameters that have been set up.
That's okay if it's validated with what the client or what the target audience wants.
Yeah.
Because it's based on an assumption. So actually what you need in the pre-search is if your assumption is okay. So your target audience, for instance, is something you could do, check your assumption in your pre-research before the sprint. And that could save you time during the interviews. But if you don't do it before the sprint, then actually it's similar to just a regular validation or the how might we in your interviews.
Yeah, it could be. I could see that. The thing is, the thing that intrigues me is that the existing prototyping process in a design sprint usually uses 1 candidate or 2 candidates if there's like a rumble going on, and it's a controlled 5 user interview, one-on-one kind of opinion-based validation or invalidation of certain things in the prototype. This approach gives it so that you're creating experiments that can be changed on the fly based on what you see and hear after 2 or 3 or 4 different, or I would say like after like a certain time frame. So if nothing's really catching fire, or at least there's some things that seem to be working, but others, you can wait a certain amount of time and say, okay, let's do a switch or do a change on this. And that in that time frame you normally would spend on prototyping and interviewing, you could basically run 2 or 3 or 4 micro experiments to get closer to an ideal. At least that's my thought. Right. So, Andrew or Sandy, which one are we doing? Let's do Sandy. Hello. But did that answer your question, Mark? Did I kind of address it, or did I go off on a tangent?
I like the technique and I like the way to go about it. It just, what I struggle with is, what if it's not the right solution? Then you're spending a lot of time to this and it doesn't respond to the solution of the audience or the target audience. Because it's our assumption, it's not their solution.
Correct. Are you saying that if you went, so let me make sure I understand. Are you talking about the prototypes that would happen after day 1 and day 2 of the design sprint? Or are you talking about the prototypes that would be conducted before the sprint starts?
Before the sprint starts.
Got it. Yeah. So you don't have complete understanding of what you're aiming for. You don't have like a focus on it. Yeah. Yep. That's certainly possible. And that would lend evidence to suggest that you need to spend more time doing, exploring that audience and the problem space and getting a real good deep dive into what that's all about in order to be able to inform what you could be experimenting with.
You at least validate your target audience, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something that you need to validate, because if you make something that, yeah, it's not targeted well, then it's like a lot of great products that we create and that will never see the light because nobody's interested in it.
Unless, of course, you make an experiment before a sprint begins and you suddenly get $500. But why they give you $500 is going to be a debate that would happen. It's like suddenly all of a sudden you have 50 signups and at $10 each, you're like, okay, I have $500 on an idea that the market said they want. What do you do? Do you go back and go back to them and say, why did you do it? Like, do you refund the money and say, here you go, this is an experiment, but what was your rationale for actually giving me the money? Why did you do that? Said, and if we do this, do you just want to get informed when we start doing it? It's a different conversation, because then all the assumptions and the questions and the rationale about who you think is the right audience and everything else, suddenly all of a sudden, if the market says, well, this is what we want, do you go against that? Or do you reframe it so that you're actually targeting something in your mind from a vision standpoint would be more on point? That's an interesting debate. It's like, just because people give you money doesn't mean it's the right thing to build, right?
No, absolutely.
Yes.
You might come up with something, it was coincidence, right, cool. But you're not, or it might be a solution for other people that really have other ideas with it. But that doesn't mean that you're spending it at the right target or for the right target.
That's true.
And then there would be a lot of spending time before the sprint with very poor results.
Yep, that's certainly a possibility. I agree. Thanks for bringing that up, though. I'm right there with you.
I love the technique.
Yeah. Okay, so where are we going to go, Lisa? Or sorry, Sandy, where are we going to go? Because I saw Lisa up there. I was going to think of this. So you went back down. So
how can you mix us up?
Okay, no. We'll go to Andrews. We'll see Andrews. So YouTube, create a video outlining the concept and provide examples of use. So to click to subscribe, a subscription channel levels within a predefined period. So there's a subscription channel that, and I probably have to give context to the idea, but creating a video outlining the concept provides examples. So I would have to take a look at the idea, because I think that would lend itself to how you would execute this. I don't know if I would do the Figma line like this one. If it's an idea that has a certain engagement model on the long haul, I would probably reflect that. Meaning that if it is a one-to-many kind of engagement where there's counseling or there's an engagement on a different level, if it involves multiple people, most of the time with a prototype, I like to kind of speak to that, or at least use elements of it, so that when it eventually evolves, if it does evolve, then it's not where it's a complete break of like the engagement, or perceived engagement of the idea. So I'm going to skip that one just for now. I'm going to go back up to Sandy, to yours, because I already had a few ideas with this one. The fake door, with creating a social media post about launching a Kickstarter on developing this training app. So you are somebody that's very like aligned with design. You have a design eye, systems design, and everything else. You have your point of view. That's like your strength. So it's almost if your graphics can basically explain in detail what you're thinking about for social media, like in terms of this training app. And I would actually go about it like it existed, so that you're literally creating like it if it was mature of like 6 months, not like what could be, but basically it is, you're going to take your first crack at what this training app is, the benefits of it, and saying, okay, if you think this idea should come around, I'm looking to gather a tribe around this idea, and use the power of social media, and I would go to my usual route, which is Pinterest, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Reddit, Slack, YouTube, and use the Gary Vee approach to basically doing pillar content where you have that one graphic sized for Instagram and for everything else, and using it first just basically on social. But what you could do, and would be an interesting variation, is that I'm holding a 30 minutes live session about a new training app that's coming to the thing, where it's the next logical step. So the reason why I say it is because in Zoom webinar, you can literally put all of those different types of social media engagements, and you get metrics in terms of what people view and what people click for that particular idea. So if you use Zoom webinar, you can basically put all those social media in there with the link back, so that you can see, without going to each one, how people are actually engaging it, if they do sign up to basically be a part of the 30-minute informational. And then you can also see, based on LinkedIn and other places and Instagram, who reshares what you do. So I would go about it like it actually is already here. And it's really, you jump ahead 6 months, 12 months to your vision in terms of what that is, exactly as you're thinking about with this. And then the 30-minute can be something where you don't necessarily have to have it, but you use that as a conversation for, okay, so this training app was a hypothetical, but what I want to get from this audience right now is like, what were you expecting to hear when you did this? So it may be a slight bait and switch. It'll depend on whether or not you feel comfortable about it, but you could cancel it outright. But that can be a way of getting evidence in many ways in terms of desirability. The ask to reshare would be probably part of the copy, but that's what I would do it. I would actually do a little bit more than just putting it on social media. I would make it an event that where you're kind of associating your brand with the idea. So that's going to be what you feel comfortable doing.
That was actually maybe not. I thought it was one of the idea that let's just jump there. Yeah, that was that.
Is that yours right there? Or
yeah, that was mine. So that I took the minimal action to execute, because I was thinking that we would like, what is the easiest way to actually try to experiment that.
So I actually went for your target action that you originally thought of, which is like sign up for an overview webinar.
Yeah,
I was already there.
yeah. I think you just took a peek of what I have written down and then picked the one that that sounds right.
Now the interesting thing is that if you did a webinar on this, if you got such a reaction that the webinar was justified, then you could ask for the donation within the end after you did the presentation. And that could be like the foundation for the skin in the game, whether or not you do it. Now, the question is that would you do the webinar during your design sprint? And would you actually schedule it on a Thursday? And would you be able to get enough people 24 hours from the announcement date to bring them around to see what they would do? So it's an interesting question. But if you just want to do the minimal, just promote on social, you don't have to do the webinar aspect at all. You can just say, okay, who's actually going to propagate it? Now, the writing question would be, is that skin in the game? Is that commitment? Or is that just giving their opinions that they share that's really great? What is going to be a measure of commitment towards your idea? That's the only question I would have. That's why the sign up for the webinar is like intent. It may be closer to actually people doing something. But again, it's a measure of how much time you have to spend to create the prototype and to create the experiment in relation to the results that you're actually looking to get. So both are valid. Just one's a little bit, well, like you said, one's minimal in terms of promoting, but signing up for the webinar would be probably more intent-based. And then the actual donation, the pledge, would be like the actual commitment. But again, setting that all up from my side of things would take half a day for me. Even the overview on the webinar, because it would be only 30 minutes and I could do 3 or 4 slides that would basically correspond to the idea, explain it to a bit. I know how to work copy. In fact, it would be one of those things that during, like, if we were both in the sprint together, you can go, Robert, I need your help to kind of like do the copy for this. And I go, okay, let's see, I'll go ahead and type it. But that's where in the sprint, you'll be looking for people to partner with to help you out with your prototype. So I'm going to try to communicate next week that it isn't 10 people doing 10 prototypes. It's out of everything that people promote, which ones would people like to kind of like team up on and try based on what they think they can get together in like a day or less, or in a day and a half. Does that make sense? Yeah. Because then if you run like 9 or 10 experiments, it's the facilitator's head's going to go because they won't be able to track everything. If you narrow it down to 2 or 3, whether it's voting or otherwise, you can essentially get an idea of which ones seem to have real resonance with the team after you do 1 or 2 days of deep diving into the problem through a design sprint. Does that make sense?
Robert,
It's
would
still
you
not
be
too
happy
late
with?
to.
Sorry, go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, I just want to say, still not too late, Robert, for you to join our team. Okay.
I love that idea, Sandy. Great. Robert, come on in.
Yeah,
I hear you have so much time recently.
The bunions that are on my team are not going to be happy if I do that. So suddenly I upend things. Although the bunion is in the evening, and my consultant is probably going to be part of the ceremonies there, because it's going to be between 8 and 11, right around the time he's supposed to go to bed, which is hypothetical in this day and age for COVID. So, we'll see. Maybe on that Wednesday when you're thinking about doing the prototyping, I keep an open calendar so that teams like your own can go, okay, slot Robert in here, kind of orient on which prototypes we want to execute on, and then set that up so that it's not guesswork, or it's not interpreting from the instructions or the video. Is this what we're doing? Is this right? Because realistically, if you noticed, I framed all of the design sprints that are happening in GVDS so that they're time boxed in. They start from midnight all the way to like 11 o'clock in the morning. So if I'm setting myself up for counseling during that week, then hello, sleep deprivation, because that's what's going to have to be the norm, and being on call to help out with that, because there are people like yourself, like all 3 of you are totally capable of leading the charge and kind of helping people out where it makes sense to do so. Let's not discount that fact. All you're really trying to do is validate questions that you may have about the approach and what you should do or should not do. So that's how I'm seeing it. If I tried to take over, then I would be an egomaniac, a narcissist, and everything I'm not. So I would much rather just be somebody where clarify what you mean by that, Robert, and then get the hell out or something like that, so that it's very purposeful when I engage. So there. Hopefully that helped.
My question would be, for instance, Sandy, would you be happy with the minimal result, like reshare, promote on social? Would you be happy with that result after 1 week's design sprint?
Probably not like after the design or during the design sprint. Well, I took that because I was thinking that it should be done before the sprint. And we are starting our sprint next week. So I was thinking, okay, what is the easiest way to actually execute in 2 days, including getting the results? So that's why I picked that in the first place.
Yeah. And it could be just going through the motions at a very light level. Let's say you don't do the full gamut like I'm suggesting, and you really just do it on the networks that you have traction, like Instagram. And doing it just on one platform just to see where it goes. Even though Instagram doesn't have its huge organic growth, it could be something on LinkedIn where there's still a lot of attention being paid on that platform too, and just concentrating on 2 and just seeing if there's evidence to suggest that people reshare it. And when you do ask explicitly for people to reshare, what do people do? Because sometimes that resharing could be because they like you and they want to help you. But the question will be, who is not in your network decides to reshare? That could be a different metric altogether.
Right.
And then you're like, who is that person? What are they doing? Because with some of the stuff I've done in the past, I saw that and I went, that's interesting. So that's a consideration. We only have 5 minutes left because I've been rambling like a madman. Hopefully, has this been helpful for all 3 of you, or for arguably all 3 of you, in terms of explaining like how prototyping would work within the GVDS, or at least how to construct an experiment with those particular 2 examples?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm astounded by the quick way you come to the solution and make it very tangible and visual, how you would go about it, and also how fast. So pretty cool, inspiring.
Here's a thought too.
Scary.
Yes, it is scary because you're setting yourself up for failure. And that's the whole point, is that a lot of times when you're doing conceptual work, you're trying to do your best shot. Designers are, and I'm one of them, where we want to get we want to understand the problem space. We want to try to make sure we understand the target. We want to understand the audience, the perspective. We want to get all that information in so that what we do is valuable and makes sense to do, and that we're not wasting our time. We don't want to design in a hole. We don't want to create things that don't matter. Totally get that. This runs counter to it, saying like throw caution to the wind, because unless you do it and you understand it, you're not going to be able to get rid of the biases and assumptions we all have as human beings regarding our own work and our own approach. And I find that I'm hesitant myself to kind of do some of this stuff because it's like, I want to feel right. I don't want to feel like I don't know what I'm talking about. So, you know, it's one of those things that sometimes maybe the idea isn't at the right time or whatever, but it's getting in the space of experimenting where I think there's more value in it. And you actually start higher up the food chain in the conversation when you have evidence and rationale to suggest an idea has merit, because otherwise it's in the arena of thoughtland and conceptualism, and that works, especially if you're in an enterprise environment that needs that kind of reassurance. But I think with the GVDS, since we're kind of pushing the envelope a bit in certain areas, this seemed like a natural fit in some instances. Just the going through the motions is what we need to do, or at least try. So anything else that anyone else wants to say about this, or anything you want to close out with, because we're getting close to the top of the hour. In fact, if no one else has any thoughts, if anyone on Zoom or YouTube would want to do some last words or one last question for everyone here, then feel free to put that in there. Otherwise, Lisa, Mark, you want to say something? Go for it.
What I like about this technique is that you can keep it actually simple and not to make something really perfect. And that's something that I get out of the Scrum world is when we start with an MVP, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to really look amazing, because the target people for MVP most of the times are pioneers, are just the trendsetters. So it doesn't have to be perfect. And that's the nice thing with this technique, with the minimal thing, the medium, and then the maybe the North Star that you want to achieve. So that's what I do like about this technique. So that it focuses on actually, trying to validate the outcome that we want to achieve.
I mean, obviously, for things like brain surgery, this would not work.
Sorry?
So things for like surgery, like complex surgery, or like things where you need the time to kind of figure things out, then this technique really isn't applicable. But for digital design or product design or things like that, there's more space to kind of play.
Right. But there still remains the question of where to put this in the sprint.
True. We'll have to figure that out, see where it goes. Sandy or Lisa, any other thoughts or questions before we break?
Looking forward to the experiment, and definitely on the actual topic that we're working on. So the sprint on the topic of domestic violence during the pandemics is going to be next week. And in case somebody is actually listening who has and wants to contribute something to this topic and wants to do an interview with me, please reach out via LinkedIn. If you're a psychologist, social worker, a former victim, or a friend, we're doing interviews, and we would like to get this right. So this is, I just want to use this actually to reach out. So looking forward to people reaching out and helping.
And definitely tag somebody when we put this on LinkedIn if you know someone that would be able to contribute or help, because all the inputs that we can get, especially if they're informed or from experience, would definitely help out all the team members that are taking this on. So I want to thank all three of you for coming on to basically be part of the show. Sandy, of course, I thank you every week, because, you know, putting up with me is a challenge in and of itself. Not kidding. You know, hopefully this was helpful and informational for everyone involved. If you do have any questions, post them up later on. You can do that in YouTube, where we're streaming right now. If you have any suggestions for a future show, me and Sandy are always open to hear what those are. Let us know, reach out, talk to us. We're open about it. And Sandy, if you want to close down what's that?
Just no emails.
No emails. Yeah, just post in YouTube and that'll be fine. Do you want to do one last graphic shot or not graphic shot, like group shot of no graphic shots. No, I mean like photos of all four of us that have been part of that, so we can my brain's faltering. We just want to take a group shot. Let's do that before we leave. All right, so We do props. We can do props this time.
Hold on, hold on.
I'm running out. Every time I grab something, it's like different.
Still got the unicorn.
Here we go. I got this. I harken back to my DJ days.
Oh,
There we go. All
Awesome.
right.
this is not
Ready?
snap cam, by the way.
No, I can't hear you because of this thing. Now it's going on my glasses. All right. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Wonderful.
Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day. And I'll speak
Thank
to you
you.
in the Global Virtual Design Sprint and all that fun stuff.
Happy spring.
Thank you. See you later, Sandy, Lisa.
Thank you.
See y'all later. Bye.
Bye.